I was just saying to these guys before you came on that I had talked a big game about basically relinquishing control and letting you drive the conversation, but we both know that I love control so much that that's going to be, I don't know who I was describing as I was saying that to you,
it was aspirational.
Listen, the only goal is to grow, right? Or to accept where you are. I don't fucking know. I can't keep track anymore. It's either be cool with where you are or just strive to be better every day. And
okay, well, that's an interesting point. Can I just dive right in here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, because that's an interesting point where you just said that, are we thinking about growth or are we thinking about accepting ourselves where we are? And my understanding is actually one allows counterintuitively for the other, that you can grow kind of paradoxically after you're cool with where you are. Does that make sense?
100%. I found that to be so true. But I also think that sometimes there are areas where you're particularly sticky and need growth, where you have to drive the growth with a little bit of effort, where it's like starting an engine and then it kind of can run on its own. But you sometimes need the jumper cables, like an assessment from the people in your life about whether or not you have an anger problem. Just out of nowhere, spitballing here.
Are you referring to
someone I know
right.
had a 360 evaluation, and that led him on a spiritual journey towards becoming a little bit happier. And here we are.
If you had a 360 review, what do you think would be said about you that you would have to work on?
Well, one of the weird things about my wiring is that I think I'm conducting that sort of all the time. I think that's an app that's running in my system. And the conclusion regularly is like, it's not good. There's a lot of room for improvement here. And some of those things feel very within the realm of something I can work on. Like, especially the things that go to the top of the list are behaviors as a partner and as a mom. Like, those cut the line if there's other stuff, which is why there's still things on that list that have been on that list for a long time. Like, being able to efficiently and quickly sort through a pile on my desk of mail and just randomness. A lot of things would improve if I were able to get better at that, get more efficient at that. My stress level would go down, my ability to feel centered, have my workspace back. Like, so many things would get better if I was able to tackle that. But because other things cut the line, like being able to get through a transition with Arlo smoothly without it impacting me and letting him, whatever it is, whatever growth opportunity I have as a mom is more important and requires more energy and space than a small organizational thing for myself. And so, yeah, I would say I'm constantly finding new places where I need to first understand and then grow. And the understanding, I guess, is, to your point, the exercise of kind of accepting what is, but it's less accepting and more just seeing, in my case, kind of gaining access to, insight into. I don't know.
Is your concern?
How would you answer that?
I have a lot to say about that, but let me just follow up quickly. Or is your concern that if you move beyond seeing clearly, that it will lapse into like resignation or complacency?
Yes. But I'm old enough now that I've done this before, and I love what happens. Like, when you find a bug in your system and you can understand it and work it out and improve it, it's intoxicating. It's especially when the more esoteric, almost the more satisfying. Something really small, especially, it's so much easier to talk about relationally, but if you're in a relationship and you find yourselves getting into the same like record grooves over and over again, when you find the secret to getting out of that and avoiding that cycle, it feels like it's been a long time, but it feels like being drugged or something. It's a really good feeling. And you can do that for yourself as well. When you realize that there's a pattern of thought or behavior that you're able to change, it's really exciting. And it's never as hard as you think it's going to be. As I was saying, I think the hardest part is the information gathering. Frankly, it's just being able to see is the hardest part.
For me, yes, sometimes the information comes to me in ways that I am not gathering it. I'm bombarded with the feedback of like, you're being a prick in X or Y ways. And so it's not so much about the information gathering. It's about not letting the shame get in the way of seeing it clearly, understanding it, accepting it. And then from that place of some measure of equanimity, taking affirmative action.
Yeah, that's definitely true. The shame and the feeling, the urge to first mount a defense on behalf of your character is so strong. To be like, as a shorthand, I've started saying things like, I'm feeling like defending myself right now, but just saying it out loud often negates the whole exercise because you realize that the person you're talking to has chosen to spend their life with you. And so presumably they think you're a decent person. So you don't have to be like, for starters, I'm a good person. That's always on. It's a staple on reality television for a reason. It's such an urge to set the table with like, here are my values. Here are the things I would and wouldn't do. I would never hurt your feelings on purpose or whatever. But even being a mom, you're constantly saying stuff to your kid like, even when you hurt someone by accident, it's really nice to offer an apology, even if it's not an admission that you did it on purpose. It's just something, it's a kind gesture to acknowledge what someone else's experience is. And then you're like, I need to take my own advice. If I'm going to be, farming that out to my kid as a life philosophy, I really need to model it as well. So
I experience this too, that I'm somebody's giving me feedback. Maybe that somebody's initials are Bianca Harris, and I hear it as a fundamental attack on my character, when in fact, all she's trying to do is ask why I was a dick at dinner last night or whatever. And I go through the roof. This is actually, I've gotten a little bit better at this in the last year or two or three, but there was one concept that really helped me with this that I don't know if you're familiar with. It comes from a friend of mine who's a professor at the university at NYU, at New York University, and her name is Dolly Chugg. And her concept is, instead of thinking of yourself as a good person, and therefore if somebody attacks you, like you have to defend yourself, or thinking of yourself as a bad person who just feels like a wretch all the time, if you think of yourself as goodish.
I like goodish. I like that idea. It's a good principle. It's sort of like the good enough mother or parent to modernize it.
Yes.
I love that idea. And I also think for me, what happens is that the moment a comment like that comes into my world, a system starts running that is so preoccupied with the fact that I've hurt someone, that becomes the loudest thing. And my whole system is oriented towards making him not hurt anymore, which is not helpful in any way. And again, back to the things we teach our kids, like to wish someone to be feeling another emotion is like 101, something not to do. And so it's sort of like two things happen at the same time, neither of which are helpful. And as is always true, the pause, anytime you can give yourself in those moments where you try to regroup and just remember what matters and what's true, is always so helpful. If I can stop myself, and again, yes, something I've been trying to get better at lately, but I'm not perfect at, is like, I'm really, even just saying it out loud, like I'm really distracted by the fact that you're sad about what I did. And that's really hard for me to accept, because what is coming up for me is the desperate need for you to know that I didn't do it on purpose. And also that I don't want it to change the way you see me, because the way you see me matters more than anything else in the world. And those two things are the loudest in my system right now, which is making it impossible for me to address the fact that I hurt your feelings, which is what this is all about. But just talking through it is already really helpful. And it's particularly rough when the behavior that's being pointed out is something that you yourself don't understand at all. And then begins the process that I was describing of like, yeah, what is that? Why do I do that? You're going to ask me for an example, and one is not coming to mind right now.
Or you're unwilling to give it.
No, I'm not. It's that I can't, it happens so frequently in so many little ways that there isn't one big example. But
you didn't answer the question of what you think people would say on your 360 review.
That's one of the things they would say, is that I'm a little scatterbrained in a way that I didn't used to be.
Do you think that's mom brain?
I do. Yeah. And mom brain is now getting a ton of research, which is great. Often in the field of like women's brains and bodies, there's an all too often repeated thing of like, there hasn't been enough research done on this. And it's always like, yeah, obviously we don't get a lot of the research money. But I mean, the article about postpartum or pregnancy changing certain parts of women's brains and all the research that's being done. And Bianca actually was the person who introduced me to the idea of like ADHD being diagnosed in postpartum age groups more and more frequently, because there have been so many complicating factors that just gone undiagnosed for so long. I don't know what it is, but in the last couple of years, which yes, has coincided with having a kid, I just don't have access to the same clarity of thought and ability to stay on one channel or channel hop if that's what I'm trying to do. Like that versatility just feels gone. And if something comes into my mind and I don't write it down, it is likely gone forever. And that is really hard because I haven't adjusted to that. Speaking of accepting things that are, I have not adjusted to that expectation of my own capacity yet. I still expect myself to function the way I did when we first met when I was 22. And so far from having a child and just not, all I had to think about was my own everything. And it's hard to run the experiment now. My life is so different. Once you have a kid, you just have this thing all the time that matters so much more than everything else you're doing. So it's hard to know if it's just that or if it's literally brain changes that I'm noticing. But yes, that is really hard. And it's hard because I think I also give off a vibe kind of loudly that wouldn't necessarily be the case.
Yes.
And I think that honestly, that dissonance is something I'm adjusting to and something that people in my life are adjusting to. Yes. That it used to be that you could mention something once and it was locked away and ready to be pulled out when I needed it. And I would remember it and execute on it within the day and inbox zero and all of those things. And that is just not true. And it hasn't been for a while. And so either that's the new me and the new operating system, and I have to make adjustments accordingly, or I have to get back to the old way. And I haven't found my path back yet. So that would be, I think, the biggest finding would be that system is working differently now.
You're having your shit together as your vibe.
It's giving. Yes. It's giving she has her shit together. Yes. But and so therefore when you forget something, the natural conclusion must be, well, she really doesn't give a shit about this because. Exactly. And that is a core fear of mine. Sending anyone the idea that I don't care about them. I care maximally about everyone in my life and everything that's happening around me. I'm just like an invested, curious person. And I think about my friends constantly. I reach out to them so rarely compared with the amount that I think about them as I fall asleep, as I go about my day. One of my resolutions every year, in addition to drinking water, is because I just don't drink enough. And also, I'm always at war about that one because like our parents just didn't drink water and they think we're all insane. And maybe they're right. But anyway, they're also drinking more water now, but no one used to. Bottled water seems like my grandmother was like, is this a prank? Like, this is crazy. But anyway, is always to try to, when I have the thought about my friends, do the thing where I just reach for the thing that's in my hands at all times and send them the thought. But then maybe it's tied to just this pacing and volume of life overall. It just doesn't happen. It stays in its nascent thought stage and never blossoms into the other stages. But if something's languishing in my inbox or a text is just not being responded to for days and days at a time, it's because I care too much to do it quickly.
Yes.
That it's much more to do with that than genuinely not caring about it. Or in some cases, it's because I take a long time to process something. And so if someone asks me for a favor and the answer is no, it will take me days to figure out how to say no. Again, because hurting their feelings or disappointing someone is like my least favorite thing. I mean, who likes that? I don't know.
I do think there's some gender dynamics at play here because I'm probably, this is generalization, but I'm probably way more comfortable pissing people off than you are.
But it depends on what it's about. Like if there's something I believe like staunchly and stating that belief is going to piss some people off, it doesn't bother me at all. Disappointment is way worse to me. I don't know. There's some things that just are hard to say no to because I know it's going to make someone feel like they're not a priority or like they don't matter, and evoking that feeling in someone else is just rough. I mean, that's hard for me, but maybe that doesn't bother you as much. I do find that disappointment is harder to contend with than anger. It's like with your parents, you know, the idea of making them angry is such a momentary thing, but disappointment feels more like an indictment on your character or something. That's rough.
Here we go again with indictments of character.
Did I say that already?
No, but I mean that it was the theme of early in the conversation of why we get defensive in the first place. Because we have some doubt about our character.
Terminally, yes, of course, always. The thing that's so fascinating about being stuck with yourself, as much as there is a self, you know, you can address that in detail for the rest of your life. I'll leave you to that question, but it's so weirdly hard to get to know and accept the things that make you who you are. Back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. It is strange how little emphasis there is in early education on understanding the way you operate. It's like the fear is if we talk about it too much, you'll ruin the experiment, like a badly applied Schrodinger's cat analogy that doesn't work here, but I'm reaching for it anyway. It's very strange. I often am observing things about the way Arlo behaves, and I'm tempted to point them out to him. And then I'm like, well, I don't want to make him too self-aware, but I don't know why not, because it's really nice to know everything I learn about the way I live is so helpful, and it makes me hurt people less by accident, and it makes me a better member of society. And in school, when you're doing the bulk of your learning and growing for all those years, none of it is about like, here's the assignment. Let's figure out how you, with your wiring, is going to be best capable of achieving this, you know? And that feels really important, you know? Oh, you're in a group doing a group project and you're functioning in this way, in that dynamic. Let's understand that, because life is kind of a group project. And so the sooner you can understand why maybe you're approaching it in this way, the better your future life is going to be. I mean, those things are kind of crucial, and we're not really encouraged until someone dumps us for some character reason to do any of that inward looking. The first time a teacher really encouraged me to do that explicitly was in college, in my psych class. Marvin Chun, my psych professor, who's an incredible professor, I tried to delay, I think, 2 exams in a row because of plays that I was in. Tech Week, it coincided with the Tech Week of a play opening. And the first time he said yes. This is a giant lecture, and my narcissism was like, he'll care. So I emailed him to ask if I could delay the exam. He said yes. The second time when I wrote him, and I wish I still had this email, but I don't, because they just like explode your email address, or they used to when you had like a college supplied email. He said something like, the answer is no. And it's because whether or not you perform well on this psych exam is so clearly irrelevant to the rest of your life. You've chosen now and what matters to you the most, which is your career as an actor. And that, I believe, is what's going to continue to matter to you the most. And so just do that. And if you get a C on this exam, I don't think it really matters to you very much. And I was kind of like, initially, just so, first of all, you know, being told no, never easy. So that was hard. That was the first stage of it. The second stage of it was like, I am going to get a C on this exam, and I don't get C's on exams, and that's really scary. And then the third stage was like, what a lesson in allowing the choices you're making reflexively without thinking about it to inform in reverse what can be gleaned about your priorities from having made those choices. I will never forget that. So Marvin, if you're listening, which you're not because you're busy dealing with other students like me, thank you for that lesson, because I think about it constantly.
That was probably more valuable than anything you learned in the class, that email exchange.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And it was kind of within his field, which is even more interesting, you know? But it was, although psych was fascinating, it was something that has stuck with me way more than any of the specific, maybe the marshmallow experiment, just because I think about that all the time. But, you know, all those other, Stanley Milgram, I don't know. That class was great. And Stanley Milgram was at Yale. So that was particularly interesting to me. But
Milgram did the experiments with the electric shocks.
Yeah.
So just for people listening who haven't heard about this, the experiment was
and it's been debunked, I think, since, unfortunately. But yes,
it was. I didn't know that. But
I think so. I'm going to Google that while you explain.
Okay, you Google that. I'll explain it. Milgram he brought people in, the test subjects, and said, we need you to deliver an electric shock to somebody in the next room who was an actor. And people were willing to deliver these really powerful electric shocks. I don't even know, maybe the people in the other room weren't actors, maybe they were being shocked, but anyway, the result is people were willing to follow orders, I think was the punchline. Even if it meant doing something immoral.
It was in the 60s, and I think it was sort of in the wake of like the Second World War and Nuremberg, and wondering, you know, what kind of a defense it is to say that you were following orders. The actors were pretending to be shocked, but the participants did not know that they were pretending to be shocked. Yes, I just asked. Yeah, the reason it was controversial is because it inflicted potentially lasting psychological harm and distress on the subjects. But I thought, anyway, I'm not going to go down a Reddit rabbit hole now. There were a lot of things I learned in that class that stuck with me. But to your point, the most personal one, obviously, was that one about my values and my time. But what's tricky about that is that it conflicts with what I was saying earlier about the amount of time I spend thinking about my friends and the amount of time I spend reaching out to them. And so there are contradictions to it, where those are the areas where I see the potential for growth. Whereas there are some situations where I'm like, oh yeah, I am just not doing that, and maybe I don't care about it. And that gives me insight into a value system maybe that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
What's interesting, I mean, I don't experience you as a aloof friend, but
that's a relief. You should. but I love you guys so much, and I wish I could see you like default every week, just on a like weekly basis. Would make my life so much happier.
I agree.
And we could do it. That's what's so enraging.
Well, you don't know this, but your husband and I are engaged in a text chain. Okay, so we are going to see each other sooner rather than later. But anyway, it's interesting you say that this is a source of ongoing sort of guilt or cognitive dissonance for you, because your new podcast really is built, which is called Landlines, is built around the notion of friends/community as a sort of mental health survival tactic.
Well, so this is part of the story of my friendship. So I am doing this podcast with two friends I've had since childhood. And one of them I've known since I was born because our moms grew up together. And the other one we met when she joined our school in kindergarten. And we have been friends since then. And that has had many vicissitudes, obviously, through life. And we have lost touch through chunks of it, never completely, but just that kind of emotional intimacy where the friendships the bonds have not been as strong. And your 20s, by large, are like a huge challenge to any long-term friendships, because everyone is shifting and growing so much and going through a lot and trying on different lives, basically. And so if these friendships can survive that stage, it's a pretty good sign. And when I got pregnant, I formed a chat with these girls who I've known forever about all of the questions I had about the things that I was needing. Like it started out with just, I was making a registry and a list of all of the shit you need when you're having a kid, which is was so overwhelming to me. It was sort of how I was processing my third trimester, because I shot Megan in my second trimester and I didn't really focus on the stuff until the third trimester, which also is the end, and it's just a very overwhelming time. I formed this chat and I would just like shoot questions into it. Like, what is the difference between a Duna and a yo-yo, and why do they, and a Nuna, and like why do they all have the same names? And they're just like, I feel like I'm speaking gibberish at this point. And it was amazing because it was like having a language model that was tailored to people who've known me since infancy and who know my wiring and who also have their own perspectives that I can kind of predict. So I would ask a question like, should I Google this rash on my breast? And I'd send a picture of my boob to the chat. Yeah. So all the hackers out there, you might find mastitis pics if you hack my photos. And they could be like, don't Google it. Yes, it's mastitis. Start your antibiotics. And then I'd have the one friend who's like wary of antibiotics and wants to like build your immune system by avoiding them. And it's like, don't take antibiotics, use these holistic things. I'm like, we know I'm not wired that way, but fine. Love to you and respect. And it's just so nice to have that community. And we kept thinking about the fact that there are a lot of people out there who don't have what we had and how lucky we felt to have it. And one of my friends is a therapist and another one is an early childhood educator, and constantly their education and their wisdom and expertise in those two fields ended up being like of particular relevance in our chat. And so I was just like, what if we could invite other people into this dynamic and feel like they're just a fly on the wall? And so that's where the idea of it came from. But the need for community, for a Q&A basically, like with my friends, came from my pregnancy. And now it's just active because we're all still needing each other's help and wisdom. And yesterday, one of our friends, and I'm the only one now that only has one kid, so they've all started over again subsequently and are remembering what it's like to have a newborn. And someone was like, did any of your kids have an 8-month sleep regression? And then like a whole text stream like fills in. And the other one was like, has anyone bought all of these travel accessories that keep getting served to me on Instagram? I'm about to a red eye with the two kids, and I want to know, like, do I need the thing that you inflate that goes under their feet? Should I sit in the bulkhead? You know, it's like all this stuff that you could Google, you could ask ChatGPT, you could, I don't know what, but somehow like getting those answers from your friends is just the best. And I feel particularly lucky because I really feel like I lost touch with them in a big way through my 20s, and being able to like still turn to that resource when I needed them on my own time and they were just there and ready felt like such a gift, because I hadn't been the kind of friend that in my mind like deserved that kind of loyalty at that point. I hadn't betrayed them. I had just lost them a little bit. Being able to have that unconditional friendship was like an incredibly moving realization and felt like such a gift to me at a moment where I really, really needed that kind of stability. And so, yeah, I would say that I hadn't been actively participating in those friendships for a couple of years then. And one of the many gifts of having our son was having that revived and having that back in my life.
Have you followed all of the discourse around the friendship recession among men?
Yes, I have. I really think, is it a recession, or is it just being revealed that it's okay? I have a lot to say on this topic. The answer is yes. You asked me one question and I've started 7 sentences. Welcome to my brain. Honestly, it feels like a liability to expose people to it. The thing I always think about, and I have no idea who put this idea into my head. I'm sure it could have been you, honestly. The idea that women bond perpendicularly and men bond in parallel. Is that an idea?
I don't meaning like men bond like both looking out a car window while they're talking because we don't
or at a TV screen at a bar or on a golf course next to each other in a golf cart. And women like to sit down across from each other at a table and be like, so I want to see your eyes. I want to like this. One of the things I love and admire about my husband is that he loves spending time with his guy friends in perpendicular settings. Like the two of you will go out to dinner and talk and like, you know, spend time together. But I think for a lot of men, that kind of emotional intimacy isn't modeled or experienced enough at a young age. And it feels, I mean, not to gender it all so much or stereotype it all so much, but I feel like a lot of men would say that that feels like they're at dinner with their wife,
Yeah.
having to sit across from them and talk to them about feelings and what you're going through. But I'm just devastated that they don't know what that feels like, because it's one of the great gifts of the world. And I feel like Alexander and his friends have saved each other's lives. Like, I'm not even being dramatic, multiple times, by their ability to just invest in that perpendicular kind of talking, honesty, sharing, vulnerability, humility. But it's not the norm, and it's really too bad. Yeah. What do you see in it when you think about it?
It seems from the data that women quite naturally maintain relationships in ways that men today, and perhaps always, are struggling with, and that it's contributing to pretty serious declines in men's mental health. And I think we inherited a story about what strength is, frankly, from your industry, Hollywood, which depicts, Lone Rangers and Marlboro men and, people bootstrapping it on the prairie. And that actually is contrary to how we evolved. Men are out there biohacking their faces off and living a paleo lifestyle, but ignoring the most important lesson of evolution, which is community. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, I mean, going back to my college days and all the anthropology and stuff, I'm actually thinking about how unimportant real emotional intimacy would have been for men in the same way that it would have been for women. The idea of raising kids and community with other women and men competing to reproduce, that kind of wouldn't have been as important, I would think. I mean, you should actually interview a real anthropologist to talk about all of this, or an evolutionary biologist. But I would think that it is actually a new skill in terms of, the timeline of male brain development and hormones in the timeline of human existence. I would say it probably isn't a relatively new skill, that friendship is a luxury of, it's why I have anxiety, like I don't have the need for all the hormones that I would have needed evolutionarily. My life is super comfortable, and I'm rarely, dealing with any kind of real fight or flight requirements. And so my system just misfires occasionally and shows me other shit that I don't need. But that's a digression. We can talk about that later. But I think that the definition of what it means to be a man has changed dramatically, and our what the role that they serve in our world has changed dramatically. And that this is, this is the stuff of adolescence and everything else that we're talking about as a culture right now. And finding that place and that purpose is vitally important, because I think it's hopefully going to come with the importance of friendship. And realizing that that shouldn't be gendered, and that it's not a competition. It is and it isn't, like a competition. I think also I feel unqualified to talk about all of this. I'm not a man and I'm not an anthropologist. I guess what I'm saying is that I do actually understand why evolutionarily it would be harder for men, because it wasn't as important for survival. But I think now it is required for survival.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much perpendicular dinner dates were important for survival in evolutionary times, but the ability to work together to take down a mastodon or whatever was vital. So with whatever you call it, men, like all members of Homo sapiens, need positive relationships.
Yes.
We may not have been socialized to stare into each other's eyes and disclose, but turns out we need it. And
totally,
we're kind of fucked without it. And the data, it's borne out in the data.
Yeah, I feel so lucky for Arlo that he has as a model in Alexander, someone who has incredibly healthy friendships that are deeply important to him. And by the way, that aren't just with men, that he has really close female friends from his whole life that are super important, and maintaining those relationships. And Arlo can see modeled in his dad an example of what it looks like to have and share and process feelings with friends is so nice.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's super, super lucky. And so am I, because I know that it's not a given. And it's really important that what he is seeing is not that old model of masculinity. I mean, he's kind of got, like, not to brag, but in his dad and in my husband, he's got like this full package of a guy who presents like a kind of totally Hollywood accurate portrayal of what masculinity looks like and functions like. And also someone who has like a pretty incredible relationship to his own inner emotional life and is totally comfortable sharing that with his son and showing him what it all looks like.
It's funny because just to say, your husband Alexander has been on the show before, and I will Alexander Draymond, and he was the star of a great show on Netflix called The Last Kingdom. And anyway, I'll drop a link to that in the show notes for anybody who wants to listen to it.
Such a good episode.
I was worried the first time when I learned who he was and that you guys were coming over to the house. It was like we saw you right after, like, COVID was ending, and you were in your third trimester, and you guys were now together, and so we hadn't seen each other in a couple of years, and so we were meeting him for the first time. But I had seen the show years before. So I was very familiar with who he was. And I was like, I'm not going to like this guy. He's going to, and then he turns up and he's like emo as hell. And literally my clearest memory from that evening was my randomly saying to him, yeah, I like your sweatshirt. And then the next time we saw you guys, he showed up with that sweatshirt in a bag and gave it to me. And I still wear it.
Yes.
That's what kind of guy he is.
From his point of view too, that's an intimidating hangout, like I would say, like a very kind of enlightened, smart, sharp, incisive person. And I would describe Bianca in the same exact way. You guys are like, and I think knowing that you're meeting friends for the first time that are wired that way, and he was familiar with your work ahead of time as well. I don't know. I mean, I think it was just immediately clear that you guys had a thing, and he doesn't feel comfortable opening up like that with everybody. Mm-hmm. So it just meant that he felt safe. But what I think what was beautiful is that I watch him do this and show Arlo this. It requires bravery because there is a certain amount of risk involved to taking the first step towards vulnerability in a new friendship. And I think women, there's a great scene in Mean Girls I think about all the time where they're looking in the mirror and pointing out things they hate about themselves. And it's sort of like the way that women bond sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's just by like talking shit about themselves together and being like, can I trust you? Are you going to join me in this exercise? For men, I feel like the equivalent is sort of tossing out an emotional kind of statement and seeing how it goes. Showing a feeling or discussing one, and if it comes back to you and there's then a rally has begun, then you're like, okay, now we're in this thing and it's okay. But it takes someone to be brave at first and just take that first thing. And I don't remember which of you it was, but it was really so nice to see because I care about you guys a lot, and I thought you would get along really well, and then it was really nice to see. And your friendship has taken on a whole life that I'm not even part of, which I have feelings about, but it's fine because Bianca and I have the same thing. So I'm so hopeful that the generation of boys that we're raising are not going to have the same, I hope, are not going to have the same struggles making and maintaining friendships. I hope.
Yeah, I agree. A friend of mine used the term emotional imbecility, which I think is spot on for, I see myself in that. And I think it's true of many men.
I think you're selling yourself short, Dan.
Well, the version of me that we met, I have actually a pretty clear visual of Bianca and I meeting you at a restaurant, like right on the West Side Highway. When you were 22 with your then new boyfriend.
Yes.
That guy needed some help.
Well, so who didn't in that room? Yeah. Like, I also remember, it's just who doesn't at all times, I guess is what I would say. But I didn't meet you then and think, oh, this guy needs some help. All I was thinking about was like, I want this guy to think I'm smart so badly. I want everyone in this room to think I'm smart. It's all that matters to me. It's all that mattered to me for so long, was just making sure everyone thought I was smart enough. And I didn't have and then what? It was just, that was it. That was the only mission for a long time.
How much, like, now I'm curious, what's your source of insecurity now? Like, is it being on Instagram and seeing other allegedly perfect moms and then comparing that to 75 missteps that you made over the last week? Or what's the new thing?
That can get it sometimes. Honestly, sometimes my biggest insecurity is when people say to trust your gut. I don't often feel like my gut's being loud. That can make me feel insecure. Like, anytime someone says, trust your gut, you got this, mama, I'm always like, go fuck yourself. That's so utterly unhelpful. Like, what? What is that? Don't call me mama. What? Like, that always enrages me. And I think it must be because it hits a nerve. And for example, the decision about whether or not to have another kid is something I think about every day. And I keep waiting for my gut to have something to tell me about this. And it is still on the fence, I think. And I'm like, okay, well, beyond that, in a world where I have finite amount of eggs, like, can something other than my gut make this decision? And maybe someone other than me, can we hire a consultant to make this choice? Because it feels like my gut is supposed to make this choice and it hasn't told me what its verdict is yet. And I don't have infinite time. That is something I might feel insecure about, is just that some people seem to have guts that talk to them very loudly and that mine doesn't always do that. The part of me that wants everyone to like me and approve of me has chilled out significantly, which is such a relief, but it's still there. It'll always be there, I think, in some way. Like, if I found out that I hurt someone's feelings or like actually offended people, that would really still bother me. But I don't think that's the insecurity you're talking about. I think as I've gotten older and I've come to terms more with who I am, it's been less scary for other people to see that, I guess. But so insecurity wise, like, if someone sees a part of my body that I don't like, that would have been my answer, truthfully, like back in the day. Or like having a pimple, like a literal imperfection on your face, would have been like, yikes, obsessive. So scary. And now, not as much, not zero, but very, very little now.
That's huge progress.
It's huge progress. Also, like, I feel indebted slightly to Gen Z for this, because I'm so, it is so cool that they are, I'll use pimples as an example because we're on the subject, but like pimple stickers and stuff like that are like colorful and star-shaped. Whereas in our generation, like, you never wanted anyone to know you had a pimple anywhere. And there's a whole like covering them up and making them not exist is like a whole thing. And whereas they adorn them, like, it's literally like, yeah, it's a pimple. What am I like? Is this going to say something about who I am? It's an oil gland on my face that's acting weird. Like, this is not a bigger story. It's just a thing on my face. And it's so nice because it's just so counter to the very presentational way that we were kind of brought up, aiming for perfection. That kind of embracing of the whole human experience is so obvious and so nice in the public kind of sphere. So I feel a little indebted to that, and also just to getting older. But that doesn't mean I'm not still vain and doing, putting Botox in my face and stuff like that, because I am. But I just mean that, like, for example, yesterday I did a full day of press and I didn't really like fully scrutinize the way I looked in the mirror throughout the day, which is shockingly different from the way I would have handled that 10 years ago or whatever. Just so different. I got backstage at a talk show and was looking in that last minute. There's like a mirror right before you walk on stage on almost all talk shows.
Familiar with
and
it.
On Letterman actually was the only source of heat, because that studio was kept famously at like 62 degrees or something. And that's why everyone wore those thick jackets. And there were these light bulbs on the sides of the mirror that were not yet LED. And so they emitted like a tiny bit of heat. And that was the only heat source in that whole studio. But anyway, there's like that last minute mirror. There's usually some mints that are unwieldy and impossible to keep in your mouth on a talk show. So I don't know why they're there. And then there's like, I don't know, a box of tissues and a bottle of water usually. And yesterday, I got to this talk show and I looked in that mirror and realized that you could see through my shirt. You could see my bra. And it hadn't occurred to me to look or care. And then I just was like, yeah, I'm wearing this. It would have been like I may have delayed my entrance onto the show in a former life to be like, I can't really defend it. I need to be wearing a bra where you can't tell that I'm wearing a bra. It's not part of the outfit. It's not on purpose. It's not on purpose, I guess, being the biggest thing. I would have just been like, this is a nightmare. But I was like, you could see this, right? And then I was like, okay. And then I just, went on, and that might make no sense. It's a deeply unrelatable story, obviously.
It's relatable to me.
Is it? Tell me.
Well, because I spent 30 years of my life on camera as a news anchor. And so I obsessed about this shit in ways that are incredibly embarrassing to talk about, like worrying about the retreat of my hairline or whatever, or like anybody shooting from the back of my head, and whether, like, as my son likes to remind me, my bald spot is visible, like that type of thing just took up so much bandwidth, is incredibly painful. And to get older and to care less or to be not so attached to it is a massive relief.
Well, but here's so we talked about this on the podcast a little bit, and what we came to was the idea of aging authentically. So it's not like I'm embracing every single thing that my body is doing as it gets older. It's not true at all. There are some things that I'm going to fight with all my might that, bother me about my aging face and body and all of those things. And there's some things that don't matter. And I think not pretending to not care about the things that do matter is sort of where the authenticity comes in, where it's just like, no, those things do matter. And if there's something I can do to address them, I'm going to do it, and not feel like shameful about it. Just really be like, yeah, because they bother me. And then also letting go of the things that don't matter and not trying anymore to hit this target of perfect is such a relief. And also perfectionism in general, because I played Marnie on Girls and was constantly asked about whether or not I was a perfectionist for many, many years, was like an area of real sensitivity, because I deeply didn't want to be a perfectionist. Because to me, drawing a distance between myself and Marnie was so correlated with whether or not people would respect me as an actor. I wanted to create space wherever I could, but I am wired to try to be perfect and to be type A, and all of those things are still true. It's just that I'm really not perfect or achieving at an A+ level at all times. And my comfort with that has increased so much in recent years, and especially after becoming a mom. It's just been such a relief to that part of my system. And what a relief to, on a day full of press when there's a million things going on, like my value system just staying what it is on every other day is so nice. Like being way more yesterday, because like now stylists and hair and makeup people need to take their own pictures of you, not just like paparazzi or official photos, because if content doesn't come like from the source where you can't get it anywhere else, it doesn't matter. I guess I'm not really on social media anymore, but so I'm taking these photos on the street in my outfit with my hair and makeup team and my stylist, and I see a front end loader carrying a bundle of wood with a chain, and I like completely just like walked away from everyone and pulled out my phone and started filming this and narrating it for Arlo, who's like obsessed with trucks and 3.5. And that to me, it brought me so much joy, and it brought me back into my body from doing this like very weird thing of just posing for photos on a New York City sidewalk, back into the part of me that I'm way more connected to right now, which is the part of me that sees like a front end loader and is like, I need to document this for my son. He's going to love this thing. And so that is really nice that I could take that with me everywhere I go. That feels so much better and so much healthier and much, much less stressful to just be almost accepting of whatever version of me steps on a carpet or steps out onto a talk show, rather than the one of me that I think should be worthy of stepping out onto a carpet and onto a talk show.
Yeah. Yeah. Having kids, it's a titanic pain in the ass in many, many ways, but it also is a gigantic dose and bolus of perspective. And it can be, if you're doing it right, a great reminder about what really matters and a relief to let go, or at least turn the volume down on the shit that doesn't matter as much. There's one aspect of parenting that you were texting me about that I really resonate with, which is, and I didn't see coming, which was how catastrophic thoughts can knife in the middle of what can be sweet moments and just fucking ruin them. Can you just talk
100%.
about that?
I mean, it might be obvious if you've been listening to us talk for this long, but I'm an anxious person. I have intrusive thoughts, and I am a catastrophizer. And that combination of traits have, I guess, kept me alive to this point, but have been a perfect storm on multiple occasions in parenting. And I guess the most like kind of normal example of that is, I said to Dan, you know, we have a really steep driveway, and watching my son, who's 3.5, run in like Crocs down the driveway is like, with the biggest grin on his face, is a crystallization of what it feels like to live in my mind, because there are two things happening simultaneously. My eyes are observing that he is so happy, like joy on a child's face. This is like a happy guy. My whole nervous system is like, he's about to fall. He's about to fall. He's about to fall every second, because he's still moving. You know, the eyes are seeing the joy and the system is preparing for the fall. And what a tragedy that I can't. And he doesn't always fall. He does sometimes. And so far, you know, sorry, I have to knock on wood. It's a thing. So far, now my dog's barking because she thinks someone was at the door. This is something.
We gotta leave this in. No, it's perfect. I love it.
Oh my God. She's so
Celebrities,
sure
they're
someone's at
just
the door.
like us.
She's bless Miss Moxie's just been dutifully protecting me against people who knock for 10 years. The first dog your son met.
That's
proudly.
True. That's right.
Cutest pictures. They're almost exactly the same age too.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's always how I remember how old Alexander is. That is such a lesson to just appreciate. Just, can I not just be in that moment with him when he's experiencing the joy of running down a hill? I wish I could quiet the part of me that's bracing for impact and just enjoy the joy that he's experiencing, because I, first of all, he is cautious and thoughtful and evaluates where his body is in space pretty well sometimes, but not all the time. And he's feeling it out, and he's not as anxious as I am. And I'm so proud of that fact. And I don't want to give it to him, and I don't want to burden him with this way of living that has held me back in so many ways, I think, and I've had to work to overcome. And he's just happy and enjoying himself. And every time I can't stop the careful from coming out of my mouth, which does happen, I feel bad, because he didn't have that idea in his head until I put it there. And sometimes I have to, obviously, if like he's about to really hurt himself, my job is to prevent that scenario from happening, but not when, you know, my system doesn't do a great job of separating the real big threats to his safety from the not real big threats to his safety. And Alexander, not your son, although he would have pointed this out too, because he's very observant and not shy about pointing things out to grownups that are areas for improvement, which is one of the things I love about your son. Very gently, early in my job as a mom, Alexander pointed out how often I said careful to our son. And his delivery could not have been more gentle, and my reaction to it could not have been more violent. I mean, it could have been more violent. I'm being dramatic, but I had as we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, it was really hard for me to take that in because of how true it was. I have always remembered it because it's like a reflex. I can't totally at that time, I couldn't at all control it coming out of my mouth. And I wasn't even always aware of it. But it has since been so revealing to notice how often I want to say it and to try to quiet the impulse of saying it. Do you have the same thing?
Well, I completely relate to so much of what you're talking about. And part of me is, I do understand why you don't want to unnaturally imbue your son with too much of your anxiety, and specifically on this thing where you're in a moment with the kid and you start having these intrusive movies that are coming to your mind of, okay, I'm playing in the waves with my son, but now I can't stop the movies of a riptide. And my son, all I see is his arm or whatever under the water. Like that's just, or I'm chopping something in the kitchen. Not a thing.
Just all you have to say is chopping.
Yes. And somehow there's a movie with the knife and the son, and it's just happening all the time. And I think where I've come to it is less like bemoaning, oh Dan, why are you ruining all these great moments, and more like interest in, oh, that's interesting, the mind does this and there must be some evolutionary purpose. I mean, aside from the fact that both you and I have kind of innate, probably very much inherited anxiety.
Yes.
There's also, I think, a thing the mind does, not only among parents, but all of us, to play these movies out as a method for protection.
Yes. But here's what's incredible is that my husband doesn't have this. He's not watching those movies, and he is cautious and smart and is not is not completely unaware of risks, but he doesn't have those movies playing. And it's an incredible balance, because I've now spent enough time around his nervous system when I'm alone, because he's shooting right now. So I'm solo, well, with a lot of help and support, but I'm the only parent here with Arlo. And I can kind of try to channel the way he would evaluate things in his absence. And when I'm gone, I know that Alexander also is a little bit extra cautious to compensate for the fact that I'm not there. And so we're able to kind of balance each other out in that way, which is really nice. But those movies don't play for everybody. And it's no wonder that you and I both at one point in our lives found it a huge relief to use substances to quiet that shit down. Like, I mean, it is exhausting. Yeah. They're always wrong. Thank God. Yes. The movies that my brain puts together are like an AI misfiring, making like weird content based on iterative, like horror concepts. It's wild. And it sometimes is helpful. And that's a huge problem. It's like my one friend who was in therapy for being a hypochondriac right when the pandemic hit. And her therapist was like, let's drop this. We'll pick this back up because all your tools are helpful and they're going to keep you alive. So forget everything I've said, use them all, and then we'll pick this back up when we've gotten a vaccine for this. The problem is that sometimes it works, and that makes it a really hard thing to try to evict completely from my personality. Yes. And when the first day we woke up after I got out of the hospital, when we had Arlo after C-section recovery, it was a little extra long. We got through that first night. The next morning we went outside to I had my coffee. We had Arlo in a little bassinet, and we're sitting out there feeling the warm sun. It was November, and it was just this really nice morning. And I look over at Moxie, who is in the bushes, and I was like, I hope she's not eating out of a bait box, because we had a rodent situation, and I don't like to think about it because I love animals and I hate the idea of having bait boxes around the house, but it was like compromising the structural integrity of the house. So we had to have one. And it was like a concept that is the most dramatic thing she could have been doing, is eating poison in the bushes. And I'm like 6 days postpartum, and, things were wild hormonally. And Alexander was like, she's not, it's fine. And called her over, and she wouldn't come. And I was like, will you just humor me and go see what she's up to? And sure enough, that bitch was eating poison. And what happened next was fast and terrifying. She got rushed to an emergency vet. It wasn't a nerve agent. Luckily, otherwise she would have died immediately, gruesomely, or not immediately, rather. It was all reversible, vitamin K, etc. But it was a moment where I was right. Like the weird story I came up with in that moment was the true story. And every time that happens, it really sets me back because then I'm like, you know what? Sometimes those instincts are super helpful. What do you do with the fact that all day they're wrong? And also how exhausting, like it's exhausting, Dan, to have these minds. And it was so much easier when we just could numb them occasionally. It was really, really nice. Yeah. And it was like a quality of life that I think a lot of people enjoy pretty consistently.
Yeah, it just runs out of road, though.
Oh, yeah. That part is not sustainable, unfortunately. But I just mean the temptation is I look back at my former self that was eagerly using those assistance and still gets help for my anxiety, but alcohol was so effective, and yet I'm so grateful that that's not in my life anymore.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Last question.
Last question. I guess we have been talking for a while.
Speaking of horror movies, I haven't spoken to you since you finished Megan 2.
Is that true? Yeah, I guess that is true.
And I was talking to you throughout the process, script writing. You were talking not only about starring in it, but also producing it, because you have a role behind the scenes. So you were really, our last conversations, you were really, really involved in the pre-production and the writing. And so I'm just curious, how did it come out in your view?
It's so awesome. It's really, really fun. I mean, these movies are really hard to make for a bunch of reasons, but a lot of them are really technical. Like when the star of your movie technically is a mostly animatronic doll, it's just complicated. And I'm only the star by default because I'm a human, but those tables will turn eventually, and I'll take number 2 on the call sheet. Megan will edge me out as number 1, but they are really complicated to make and so rewarding. And I am super, super proud of the movie we've ended up with. It is really fun. And I keep thinking about like how fun the ride is. Like, I wish I could wipe my memory of my deep knowledge and familiarity with this movie and just watch it for the first time. Or maybe the more fun viewing is even the second time, because it is exhilarating. And when it starts, and when it begins, you've no idea where it's going to spit you out. And that is like one of the real joys of movies, of watching movies. And also what's really fun about this movie is that people who loved the first one will love this movie. And we're bringing other genres into the umbrella, like action. It's like a thrilling action movie with this terrifying, creepy doll at the center of it. And it's just fun to be able to say, like, if you own T2 or Aliens or RoboCop, like, you'll love this movie. And also your preteen daughter and her friends are going to love this movie. And it's also like it's fun that we're releasing it during Pride, because like it feels like we're paying homage to a huge group of people who supported the movie the first time around. And there are a lot of groups of people who I think will really enjoy this movie. And that is really exciting to have made something that I think isn't for everybody, and thus can be enjoyed by everybody. Because when you're like, the experience of watching a movie that is engineered to try to be a 4-quadrant movie is kind of exhausting, where you're like, oh boy, this is the section I'm supposed to relate to. And here's the section my husband is supposed to relate to. And you're kind of like, the lack of specificity means none of us are happy. And Gerard, who's the like brains behind it, has such a specific sensibility and sense of humor, and is so precise that it ends up being actually so enjoyable to a much more broad swath of people than it would be if it were being engineered to a very specific group of people. And I just can't wait for people to see it. It's really, yeah. And it was like a kind of titanic effort. It's much bigger than the first one in kind of every way. And, which, yeah, everyone will see. And, I just can't wait. I can't wait to be able to talk about it with more specificity. I hope that wasn't broad to the point of being boring.
No.
But
Well, first of all, congratulations. Second, I'm super excited to watch it. So
Good. Well, I think you'll love it. I think you'll find it's really funny. I think it's funnier than the first one, and it's a really fun ride. Alexander has this category of movies that I've been trying to define for our entire relationship called fun movies. And you'd think that would have like a simple definition, but I've been trying and failing to define it since we met. And the other day I very nervously was like, do you think Megan is a fun movie? And he was like, yes. And I was like, I can retire. I made a fun movie. I still don't totally know what it is, but if it fits your definition of that, then I can be happy now.
Nice. Thank you for doing this.
Oh my God, we're at the end. This is it.
Yeah.
I felt like there was so much. Okay. Thank you. A simple thank you for doing this. Oh, it's an immediate anxiety attack. Well, I don't want it to be over. It's been so nice to catch up with you.
I know.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so scared to do this show for so many years, and this was so fun and not at all scary.
I know, it does feel good. I finally got you on this fucking show.
Well, I think I had to. Podcasts were really scary to me for a long time because they're long form. And for someone wired the way I was before, as we've discussed, that every time you open your mouth is an opportunity to fuck up. And when you're just evaluating yourself on that binary, then yeah, podcast is really high stakes and really scary. And so I had to just grow up a little bit before I was ready. But here we are.
You did great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.